the shape that is. That's fantastic. So hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I know we've got people tuning in live. We've got, I think, people from all over the UK, but also parts around the world as well. So very warm welcome to the studio. So first of all, we can go straight into then the materials that I'm going to be using. So I'm painting a portrait, a very kind of colourful, expressive portrait, obviously with real emphasis on more colour in a picture. I'm working in oil paints. Now I'm an oil painter. I use these lovely Michael Harding paints. However, you can translate this into lots of area of opaque painting, particularly with acrylic and gouache as well. So it isn't specific for oil at all. Of course, because I am working in oils, I will use the language of oil paint. So if you're a water-based medium artist like acrylic, you know, when I say the word turpentine or solvent, you just translate that in your head for water. But apart from that, the similarities remain incredibly similar. And the fact that I'm using colour really does not matter in regards to what medium you use. You could even take a lot of the colour references I'm using today and even put it in a different medium like watercolour, which is a very different way of painting, obviously, to oil paints, but a lot of the similarities that will be there. So to go through the colours, first of all, that I am using what's called a primary biased colour palette. Oh, and by the way, if for some reason, if you're watching live right now, if for some reason you notice that you exit the meeting for any technical issues, just click the link and I will let you back in, so do not worry about that. I will let you get back in the meeting if you fall out of it. Now, the colours that I've got on my palette are titanium white. I've got two yellows. I've got a cadmium yellow light, a nice bright one, and a yellow ochre, a slightly deeper yellow. Two yellows, one light, one dark. Then I've got two reds, cadmium red, or it's cadmium red light, but a nice bright primary red, and alizarin crimson, a nice dark red. Again, one light, one dark. Then I have a green, a viridian green, a really good, strong, acidic green. And I have two blues. I've got a light blue and a dark blue. The light blue is, this is actually King's Blue Deep. It's very, very similar to cobalt blue. If you've got cobalt, it's very similar. It's actually cobalt with a bit of white added, but King's Blue Deep is a sort of a slightly paler sky blue alternative. And the darker colour I've got is French ultramarine blue, but I've got a pair of blues. So you'll notice I've got pairs of primaries, pair of yellow, pair of reds, pair of blues, and I've got one pre-mixed green because it just helps speed that process up if I want to make sort of strong acidic greens. And titanium white is the brightest whites that we have available to us, as well as an artist, to keep things very light. So it's just focusing on those primaries. That's one of the keys of working with a lot more colour in your picture. Now, the brushes that I'm using Rosemary & Co. Brushes. Many of you know that I ambassador both for the paints and also the brushes. So I tend to use hog bristle brushes. These are quite thick, wonderful kind of rough brushes, very, very good for mark making, which I'm a really big fan of in painting. And they're in a range of sizes from size 2 up to size 16. I'll tell you which ones I'm specifically using at that time. The medium that I'm using, there are only two mediums I ever use, and one of them is my solvent, my paint thinner, and I use what's called Zest-It. I haven't got a bottle there. Zest-It is a little a lovely low zero odor solvent. It's sort of much more natural and it's not flammable either, and I'm using it a lot more these days because I don't really like the fragrance of turpentine, so I use that as my thinner. And very, very rarely I'll use a little bit of linseed oil if I need to push the paint further, particularly for the detail at the end. Very rarely I'll use it, and if I do, I will let you know that I'm using it, but it makes up for less than 3%, even less actually, of a painting. So hello if you just joined us. I'm just making sure that is all muted there. So, by the way, if you have your camera on, by the way, you don't have to have your camera on. If you're nibbling your supper or want to disappear and sing lamb, you don't have to have your camera on. But it's nice to see an audience. So, so those are the materials. Now, the surface that I'm working on an oil painting paper. I do a lot of my practices, my sketches, my teaching, my exercise on paper, just because it's quite cost effective. The paper I'm using is oil painting paper by Daler and Rowney. So it's Georgian oil painting paper, and it's 50 by 40 centimetres or 12 by 16 inches in old money. I do my proper paintings if they're commissions or things for the gallery on either canvas or board, ply board, and I prime them. But for a lot of these teaching exercises, like these ones on the wall, they're all done on oil painting paper. It's cost effective, and you could put them on a file and a folio at the end of the day and not going to take up too much space. And when you paint as frequently as I do, you need as much space as you possibly can. So I think that's all of the basic kind of materials. So I want to talk now about sort of working from the image. You know, of course, I'm working from a photographic image, and I have emailed the wonderful character face I'm going to paint tonight. And I've chosen that not for any specific reason, whether it's colour of skin, expression, angle of the head. I've just chosen it because it's a beautifully lit head. It's got a wonderful range of highlights, midtones, not many shadows, but it gives me an opportunity to look at the colours there and see what I can do with it and interpret it, to push it, to make it just a little bit more interesting and colourful and more dynamic in the colour approach. So we've got a lot of work to do because I've got to paint a portrait from scratch to finish in about 2 hours. If you're painting along with me, take a deep breath. Here we go. I'm going to show you how we get on with it. So we're going to start off with some drawing, and I'm going to move the camera now closer to the action. So I'm going to get out of sight, but you don't want to see me. You want to see what is going on, most importantly. So there we go. So here's the fabulous face that I'm painting this evening. I'm going to take this down. That just helps the camera focus. And something to look at. Fabulous. Right, so where we start. So the first thing I want to do is get a sense of where the head is. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing, a little bit of scribbling, and I don't draw with charcoal necessarily. I tend to just draw with the brush, to draw with a paintbrush. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to grab this one, which I think is number 6. I actually wanted number 4, which is just a little bit smaller. There it is. That's a number 4. Number 4 is about the sort of the size width of my little finger, maybe just a little bit thinner because it's been worn down over time. So that's the sort of the width of my finger. And I want to do a little bit of scribbling, just a little bit of sketching. I obviously don't want to put too much emphasis on actually how to get a portrait per se in regards to proportions and such. Of course, naturally some of that's going to fit in. But I'll do a little bit of sketching to begin with. And also the colour that one chooses to start the portrait off is often a good indicator in the direction of colour. So I'm going to take my number 4 brush and I'm going to dip it in a little bit of terps. This is my lovely Lines Golden Syrup thing, but in here is my Zest-It, which I'll call terps, my paint thinner. So I just get a little bit on the brush, so it just lubricates the brush up. And I'm going to put a little bit of that on my palette. Now I usually have my palette, I don't usually have it quite upright, I usually have a holding palette, but for the sake for us to see the colours, I'm putting it upright. And I'm going to mix an orange, okay? I'm going to mix a nice warm orange that's relatively close to the skin tone, if you like, a nice sort of warm orangey colour. It's slightly kind of more exaggerated as opposed to being specific. I don't want it or need it to be a specific, accurate colour. I just need it to be a colour that is going to be useful to paint all over. So I've got a good sort of warm orange. You could use anything. You could use purple, you could use any colour. I'll veer away from using a black or a grey, but I'll try and use a warm colour. And the consistency of the paint is very light. So there's hardly anything. There's hardly any pigment on the brush. It's thinned down with the terps and there's not a lot of pigment. That's the most important point. There's not a lot of pigment on the brush. So first of all, let's do a bit of scribbling. I want to get a sense of where this head is. So I start thinking it in terms of shapes. So the head is going to be there and the head is going to be life size or roughly life size, which is going to be bigger than the span of my hand. If the head is bigger than the span of your own hand, you'll know it's going to be pushing towards being life size. Let's sort of divide the head up into a couple of compartments. So we've got an area of where the lines are going to be for the eyes. So I think the eyes are going to be about there, which is not quite halfway, but a little bit. So if I make the head roughly the same size, that should help. And then I get a sense of where the kind of the nose is and the mouth, which is on a slight angle. So I've got this sort of structural compartment of where I think some of the features are going to go. There's going to be some big ears and a chin, and there'll be a neck down here somewhere. As I said, my focus is not necessarily on accuracy of likeness today. It's going to be much more focused on playing with the colour, but I'll try and get something of likeness as well. And in order to sort of get a sense of structure and likeness, it's about simplification. So I'm simplifying the key shapes of a face in simple shapes. So I've got, that nose, I've actually just simplified as at the moment a kind of a very sort of strong triangle. And that itself goes up into sort of an eye socket, which goes up to an eyebrow up there. So we've got an eye, which is sort of taking place sort of somewhere in that region. It's all very guessy at this stage. Try not to have things too specific and too sure of themselves. And there's going to be another sort of eye in that area there. So if I kind of make that, I suppose, like for like, I suppose we call that sight sizing. I'm trying to sort of match it to that in regards to scale. And then we've got his little philtrum and his lips. And then, of course, we've got a strong angle coming up. So this is all very much just focused on drawing. You know, this isn't really painting, or this is actually just draftsmanship, getting things, roughly speaking, in the right place. But by starting to make one's mark in this bright orange color, I'm already starting to push things, because that's what this painting is going to be at. It's about pushing. We're going to push it in ways. We're going to really stretch it in perhaps directions it's not happy to do, but something that will hopefully give us an interesting indication. I'm already sketching in tone. You see, because of this ear, I just sort of shaded it in, and even parts of this eye socket, I've already started to push in a little harder with the paint. You see, we call this a scumbled brushstroke there. How kind of, do you see how kind of feathery and fluffy it is? It's not very strong in paint. There's hardly any pigment on it, and it's not dripping, it's not wet. It's quite scratchy, and it's really, really good for making marks because it's quite vague. It's not, you know, strikingly confident. So if I just sort of shade in that part of his upper lip there and down here, it's a little bit like shading with a bit of charcoal or a pencil on its side. You see the difference between the kind of the line marks and this soft marks. You know, it's amazing the variety of mark one is able to make, and it's very forgiving. So if you're not particularly strong in draftsmanship, then sort of scribbling it in this way is a really kind of nice way of finding something, whether it's a face, it could, you know, of course, easily be a still life or a landscape or whatever. So I'm part thinking of it in terms of lines, structural lines, but also the combination of thinking of it in terms of tone and mass. So, you know, I've just started shading that. So I'm not quite sure where his chin's going to be. It's going to be somewhere down there. It's probably going to finish, roughly speaking, there. His neck is quite close to his mouth, so I've got to make sure I'm going to fit that in. And his shoulders are quite high as well. His shoulders are surprisingly a lot higher, but actually sort of into that area there. Get a little bit more paint on my brush. And there's another sort of angle coming down here, which is slightly lower, which is a nice sort of balance there. One of the reasons why I did choose this image is because there is some color indications. You know, it is leaning towards certain color areas. So, you know, we've got the skin, which is very warm in temperature. We've got these very warm browns and oranges and reds, naturally representing his skin complexion. But then we also have that kind of contrast of the blue of the clothing. So already it's sort of naturally suggesting color options. Now that isn't crucial for creating a painting like this, but it does help. It can indicate and push things in a way that makes decision making that little bit easier. So if you were to paint a person you know, that had a particularly bright headdress on, or a scarf or some clothing, already you've got some colors that you can take from the clothing and you could potentially utilize elsewhere in the picture. That doesn't mean to say you have to work that way. You can just paint someone without any colorful clothing choices at all and go from there. So I feel like I've just got a start of something. I've got a very kind of light, scribbly sketch. And of course, it's not supposed to be perfect. These things never are, particularly at this early stage. I think it's quite important to stress that at this stage, it's not supposed to be a perfect sketch. It's supposed to be just a something. And even I sometimes just remind myself that it doesn't have to be perfect, but I just sort of just scribble over it. Just don't be so precious. I think sometimes we get very, very concerned. Like, I'm doing this, I'm not even looking at you. I'm just messing it up. So don't be so precious on these things. Allow it to be a nice sort of scribbly sketch. Now, I want to think now in terms of tone. I want to get a little bit of clarification. Bits of it, okay. I can see the eyes are a bit too far apart. The features need moving and crisping, but I can't really do much more with this color. I could make it slightly more red, but as an orange, it's a good mid-orange. I want to kind of give myself a darker tone, and that darker tone is going to help me kind of cling on to some features just that little bit more. So I take now a little bit of alizarin crimson. Now, of course, alizarin crimson is a good dark tone, and it's also lovely and transparent, which means it's still going to allow some of the light of the paper come through. So I'm going to use alizarin crimson just to help me sketch in a little further, but actually just working slightly darker in tone. So I'll start with the nose as a good shape, because I've got a really good dark nostril indication there. So instead of using a black or a brown, the darkness of tone that I can see for the nostril, I've actually chosen a dark tone in the color, because of course every one of these colors has a tonal value. And what I mean by that, for those that are not particularly clear on what tonal values are, you have to imagine that you're looking at the world through a sort of a pair of black and white glasses, that when you put those glasses on, everything in the world suddenly turns to black and white. These aren't these glasses, by the way, these are my new glasses. But when you look through the world through black and white, colors start turning, instead of color, they actually start revealing in, well, variants of gray, sometimes very, very dark and sometimes very, very light, according to the tone. So every one of these colors, if I was to kind of click my fingers and turn this black and white, obviously the yellow and the white, that would be the lightest white. Then these would be quite light. Also that blue would be quite light, a light gray, because there's a lot of white in it. But can you see the alizarin crimson and also the ultramarine blue there? They are very dark. In fact, that almost looks black, doesn't it? Ultramarine blue looks very black when you squeeze it straight out the tube. It's not until you add a little bit of white into it that it starts to reveal that actually it's not black at all. So I'm substituting, dark tones that I can see and swapping them for, instead of accurate color, accurate tone, but just a different color. So instead of making it a dark black, I've just chosen a very dark alizarin crimson. Now I am going to go darker than this. This isn't the darkest I'm going to be. I am going to be a bit darker, but I'm just sort of showing. So I'm going to plonk in this. So that's where I think his first eye is, and maybe a little bit higher than that. I'm just checking a few little angles. If you see me put my stick up, I'm just trying to get an idea of where things are. I'm going to push that up a little bit higher. I've just picked up another brush, which I use sometimes as a correcting brush, so I can just rub that out. This is a good oil painting technique. Take a clean brush, dip it in a little bit of solvent, and then you can rub around and you can sort of erase it, a little bit like a rubber with a charcoal drawing. So I think that eye is going to be somewhere about there. And then we've got the shadow taking place. I think I'm going to push that up a bit higher, like that. This is one of the reasons why we like oil paint, because it's just so forgiving. If you want to say cheerio, move it around, it can go away quite easily. So I'm going to get a sort of an eyebrow shapey there. We've got a little bit of a shadowy shape there. Lift that up around that way. And then we've got this happening over here. I'm just going to do a little bit of shading in that staining red and that staining there. So I want to create this sense of three dimension just using these, at the moment, two very simple colors. And there's a very important trick that I'm doing right now that's allowing me to see my tonal values. And I know that most of the students that paint with me regularly, who I can see this evening, know exactly what I'm going to say at the moment, and that is to squint your eyes, to slightly close your eyes and to squint them together. And of course, when one does that, when you slightly squint your eyes like this, your eyelashes come together. When your eyelashes come together, it does two things, very useful things for us as artists. Number one, it makes everything look fuzzy and blurry. And at this stage of the painting, when I'm working in sort of very bold, sweeping marks and statements, working in sort of fuzzy mess is very useful. I'm just sort of thinking and looking at it in terms of shapes, as opposed to thinking of it in detail. Detail comes later, but for now I just want to think of it in very basic shape. You see, when I'm drawing an eye, I'm still fumbling for it. It's still very fuzzy, it's still very guessy and sketchy. It's not precise and crisp and edged and outlined. So squinting your eyes is wonderful for seeing things in a very simplistic way, fuzzing it up, but it's also very good for understanding the tonal value of something, because when you squint your eyes, what it also does, the vision that you get when a squinted eye is it takes away kind of the strength of color, and sort of you get a very kind of very sort of darkened greyed version of the world. So all bright colour sort of disappears, and all you're left with is you're left with this sort of variation of dark greys and blacks and sort of and lights. And that's very, very useful for picking out where my darkest tones are. So as I look at this photograph, and I am doing this with squinted eye, if I look at this photograph, I'm looking at the left part of his cheek, which I can see is quite dark. This point here, it's quite dark, and then it sort of comes down to this way, and then it gets darker to be his sort of beard. And I can see that the skin here is reflecting the light really quite nicely. Obviously, there's a very cold lamp light on the model, and I see the lightness a lot clearer when I sort of half squint my eyes. So squinting is such an important, useful tool. And I think if you remember anything, if you want to become a good painter, I think the best thing you could do for yourself is just squint down. The less you see, the easier it will be. It's one of those things I kind of learned a little too late, and I wished I learned it earlier, because then I wouldn't have spent ages making rubbish paintings. I'd have made paintings that actually were a lot more true and authentic, and ironically more realistic, by painting them as they actually saw, by simplifying what is there. So there's that sort of sense of where that mouth is. Again, this is starting to get a little crisper in accuracy than it was, but again, it's not perfect, but again, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a chin somewhere down there, and there's going to be a neck down there. I think his shoulder comes a lot closer. Yes, a lot closer in, so that shoulder line's going to be more there. All his neck on here is quite shaded, isn't it? So let's get that shaded in. It's quite light there, so that's going to come somewhere there, I'm not quite sure. The bottom of the ear is about to there, that's fine. And then I'm just looking at the top of the head, and I'll just do a few little marks up here, because the top of the head, no one's really going to care or know what's going on up there. But again, just push that paint around, and you can see, if I take my finger and just drag it across, can you just see how thin this is? I mean, there's hardly anything on. I want to just how impossibly frugal I'm being with my paint. And again, I just want to stress, when I say the word thin, it's not soaking wet like a watercolor, so it's not dripping wet. When I say thin, it's just incredibly sparing. I mean, there's just those bristles are stained more than full of paint. So just to kind of reiterate that consistency. Right, I'm going to push now that little bit darker, and I'm going to bring now ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson together. Now, when you bring these two together, something magic happens. You essentially get a black. It's amazing. You get a black without actually realizing that you would acquire a black. Now, you could push the black slightly warmer by adding a little bit of the reds, or you can make it kind of bluer or cooler by adding a little bit more of the blue. But if you kind of mix those together in equal measure, that's the ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson, you essentially get a fantastic black color. But it's a black with interest. It's not a boring straight out the tube black. It's a black that's got character to it. It's a black that's got some nuances that are really useful to play with. So I'm starting to put these in. He looks a bit funny now, doesn't he? And I'm starting to identify parts of the picture that have this dark tone. So I'm looking at places like the eyebrows and a bit of the hair. It's going to come a little bit lower. And I'm establishing the thing that's pretty much important in a good traditional oil painting in many respects, and that's working from dark to light. So this bright, colourful underpainting is just that. It's an underpainting, it's a drawing. Some of it might stay in the last part of the painting, but it is just an initial scribble and sketch. What I'm putting on now are my actual sort of painted marks. Okay, these are the parts of the painting that will hopefully remain. And I'm starting with my darkest tones, my darkest tonal values. And that's a very traditional, typical way of painting oil paint, is working from your darks and then moving on towards your lights, your midtones and then your lights. So working dark to lights, quite traditional in many respects. Can you see every time a mark goes on, you just sort of clarify and find that lightness just that little bit more. And you can see, can you see how the drawings develop? You can see my lighter orange we still see a few marks, how some of them are way off and how it's been clarified and changed every time a new color goes on. So every time I put a new color on, i.e. now, so this darker color, I'm asking myself where I'm placing the marks, is it in the right place or does it need to go a bit higher or lower? I'm not just filling in what is already being suggested. I'm actually like, I've just moved this shoulder over again. I've just moved it from there. The red was there and now I've moved it over again. Every time I lay a mark, I ask myself, is it in the right place? So I'm constantly drawing, even when I'm blocking in and painting and putting in the kind of these initial tones, I'm still drawing and finding the face as I go. So I'm going to take I'm taking some step-by-step photographs so I can remember how it developed. I often do this, partly for teaching purposes, but partly so I can remember how the painting developed. So let's now start really kind of putting on some colors. All that was done with a number 4 brush, but I feel like I need a brush now that's got a little bit more oomph to it. So I'm going to jump to a number 6. A number 6 or a number 8. I've got 6 and an 8 here. So I'll probably work with a pair of, I'll start with an 8, I think. And I want to start really blocking in now the kind of the main tonal values of the face. And I'm going to start off really looking at these sort of, it's this lovely kind of tone there on the chin, under the nose, that upper lip. It's not the darkest tonal value, but it's certainly a good sort of what we call a transitional half tone. It's not quite his half tone. His half tone is that cheek color there, which is a little bit more orangey. This is sort of a little bit deeper in tone. So all color choices start with that, identifying the tonal value. So I know I need to be dark, but how dark do I need to be? Well, I need to be a little bit lighter than the color that I initially laid down. So if I put that alizarin crimson down, tonally, it's a little bit lighter than that dark mark of the crease. I'm going to take you in just a little bit closer so you can see these differences. You'll get a little bit of detail lost in the face, but on the camera, but you should see a little bit better in regards to the painting. Now I might put just a little bit of yellow into this, a little bit of the yellow into my crimson mixture. And that's just there, that's just lightened up a fraction. Have you noticed, to lighten up a color, I didn't reach for the obvious. And the obvious, of course, is reaching for white. And if we're looking to paint pictures that have that sort of a greater sense of strength of color, is that avoidance of the overuse of white. In fact, I'll go as far to say as most artists that are learning and beginning often sort of lean quite heavily on the color white to lighten up a picture. And of course they would, because white, that's essentially its job. That's what white is designed to do. However, we all know there's a problem with that, and that when one uses too much white, it can often give the appearance of making things look very chalky, very dull, very kind of very flat, and ironically a little bit grey sometimes with the overuse of white. And the reason being is white, particularly titanium white, is a very opaque color. It's very dense, opaque. It's not transparent like actually these colors I'm putting on now, that are still allowing some of the white of the paper to come through. Now, if you're not familiar with the kind of what transparency is, watercolorists know this because they rely on transparency to allow their paintings to look as glowing and as beautiful as they do, because they don't use white paint to lighten something. They just use water or thin the paint out, and then many other technical things as well, but that's a simplistic way of saying it. They allow the white of the paper to lighten up as opposed to the white of a pigment. And some pigments in oil and all in watercolor allow light to travel through. So the particles of some pigments, alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue particularly are good examples. They are built as such that they do allow light to kind of pass through or bounce on them and then sort of reflect off. So they have this sort of wonderful transparency, which are to travel through them, sorry, not to pass through, bounce off them. So they kind of travel through them. So the light of the paper is sort of almost coming through some of these brush strokes. And it gives it this sort of wonderful light glow. And there are some colors that are not transparent. They are the opposite. They are opaque, which means they're much more stronger. And you don't get a color as more opaque as titanium white. It's a very, very strong, dense, opaque color. And consequently, the overuse of titanium white can really make a picture look quite dense, quite kind of solid, quite structural, which can be a necessary needed thing in a picture, but the overuse of it can really kind of kill the luminosity and particularly the sense of color in a picture. So my advice is that when you're looking to lighten a color, to ask yourself, hang on a minute, are there any other colors that I could use instead of white to lighten my color? And it's back to thinking of color in terms of tonal value, because all colors have a tonal value. They're either, a variation on the degree of being, gray, light gray, mid gray, or whatever, if you were to think of it in black and white. And for me, for this purpose, lightening these colors, lightening these oranges, instead of adding the white, I'm adding this yellow, because the yellow tonally is quite light. And it's giving a really lovely range, interesting range of fiery oranges, which also coincidentally is working quite nicely for the warmth of his skin. So yellow is proving very helpful because it's lightening my color, but it's also not compromising my orange. It's sort of giving a nice variety of oranges in this specific case. You could do this with a different color. You could do this with bright blue. You could do it bright purple. Doesn't really matter. If you're going to do that with another color, just have variations of that blue or purple and think how can you lighten that color, but without always reaching to the color white. Now, I am going to use white a little bit later. I'm not going to, this is going to be a picture without any white in it, although that is completely possible. That is a good test exercise. Set yourself that little challenge one day. See if you can paint a picture without the use of white. It's a very, very, very valuable exercise to help you realize how you can utilize the tone of colors. We'll save that for another day, shall we, as a project. But just be careful of that, reaching for that blob of white, because there are often some other colors that can do the job for you. So we've got this sort of really wonderful kind of modeling of oranges. I've already run out of yellow, pretty much run out. So this isn't really specific to tonight's theme, but a common observation I've noticed in classes and workshops when I'm teaching is that the kind of a frugality of paint. Sometimes people just can be a little bit on the frugal side of putting paint on. I think there's sort of this nervousness that they're going to just waste it, and as a result, the color can get very muddy very, very quickly. So always sort of put a big splodgy blur squirt on to begin with, and then if you've run out, as soon as you've run out, top up. Don't do the kind of cardinal sin of just going, oh well, I'll just make do without, because you'll always end up making, compromising mistakes as a result. And I want to talk about the shapes that I've left. Can you notice I've left very specific blank shapes? Okay, and if you look on the picture, particularly on the left hand side of his face, you'll notice how they all very much relate to a very important, significant difference that we've got going on. So on the right-hand side of the face, on the photograph, I'll just zoom out just a little bit so you can see. But you'll see that the left-hand side of his face is in light. He's got a very light highlight reflecting on him. And on the right-hand side, it's a lot darker. So we have this sort of dark channel. There is a lovely bit of reflected light there, which is going to be gorgeous to paint. But on the right-hand section, is mostly on the darker side, and the left-hand section, he's mostly light. And if you notice here on my pitch, I've left these patches of light on his chin, on the nose, on the cheek, even up on the forehead. I've actually left them unpainted because I am going to put on a different color temperature, which gives us and nudges us in the direction of another area that we're going to think about in terms of getting more color in our picture, which is to think of it in terms of not just tonal value, light and dark, but also at the same time thinking of it in terms of temperature, which is warm and cool. So at the moment, I'm creating a warm picture. Okay, so thinking of terms of temperature, and we'll just remind ourselves what I mean by that. All colors have a temperature leaning. So some colors can be seen as more warm and others cool. And typically the colors that I'm using at the moment, which are my reds, oranges, yellows, and very hot burgundy purples are all very much warm colors. So at the moment, I've created a very warm color palette portrait. And for a portrait, that's a relatively good thing to do, because of course skin is warm. You know, I want to create a nice sense of warmth for the skin. So painting it in these warm tonal values, oranges, reds and yellows, already sort of doing a lot of that indicating work for me that it is skin and portrait, because of just the temperature of the colors. Now, am I saying therefore you can't paint a portrait in cooler colors? Of course not. You can paint a portrait in lovely kind of blues and purples and greens, but just by starting off with these warm colors, if you notice that there's a harmony already, there's like this sort of rhythm and togetherness in this picture. And that's the reason for that, is because of the temperature I'm painting in. It's all warms. This has a kind of a technical painting term. I'm working in a specific color harmony. And the color harmony I'm working in is what we call an analogous color harmony. It's basically a family or a series of colors that are all very closely related. So it's, in this case, it's all the kind of the warm reds and oranges. They're all very closely located to each other on the color wheel. So when you paint something like that using an analogous color palette, i.e. colors that are quite closely located on a color wheel, they're naturally going to look nice with each other. They're going to just work. You know, they're going to kind of go with each other, if you like. You know, people who work in fashion or interior design know a lot about utilizing colors together to create these lovely kind of feelings of harmony or relaxation or style or comment, so on and so forth. So by starting out with a relatively limited color start, as I am now, you're going to just make your life just a little bit easier when it comes to kind of more extreme color choices later. And in itself, it is a good exercise, just working in very simple color tones. So I'm just the only colors I've touched. I've chosen a little bit of blue to darken it, crimson, cadmium red, yellow. I actually haven't even touched the ochre. I could bring in a little bit of ochre in it, which is just going to give another warm kind of different variation of the orange. So it's a limited color palette, really a very limited color palette. I've not touched my lighter cool colors at all yet. They're going to be the kind of the accents that are going to really, hopefully, be the exciting zing for the picture. You notice I've just sort of gone back into some darks just to sort of bring them back. I'm always drawing, always finding and trying to bring as much of the picture back again. Okay, so let's just photograph this at this stage and take it to that next point. And I want to now, for the very first time, bring in just a touch of white, and just want to see, you know, so sort of see the tone of all these colors on my palette. Watch what happens when I put in just a little bit, and there really isn't that much on the brush, as you can see, not a lot. Just see how chalky that is. So it really makes it a kind of a very dense color. See how solid that feels, which is fine. It's not a criticism. It's just an observation. So when I'm picking up bits of white, I'm very cautious to use just a little bit of it, just a little whisker of it on the edge of my brush. Don't want too much. It's much better to work in sort of little doses, little amounts than larger amounts. So I'm using this white just to sort of pick up some of my lighter tonal values. So again, I'm not thinking about painting this portrait necessarily for accurate color. I'm not thinking of it in terms of color, ironically. I'm using a colorful color palette, but I'm not looking at trying to match this bit of his nose the right color. This isn't about color matching, it's about tone and color interpreting. So I'm just looking at all the lighter parts and giving that indication. And I'm taking very small steps. I'm not sort of jumping up to the very brightest parts of his face yet. I want to bring in, if I look at his chin here and his lip, I just feel that that area has a warmth to it that the yellow isn't really working. And I think it'd be nice to get some pinks, just a sort of a warmth of pink. Like just a shockingly pink would work quite nicely, or I think it would be at least quite interesting. So I'm just wiping my brush clean. I don't wash my brushes, I just wipe them clean on the palette. So I'm going to take a little bit of the crimson here and a little bit of white. And we know if you bring those two together, you should get really good, that lovely hot pink. So if I just put a bit down, it's not dramatically different from what is there. Again, it's just little steps. So if I just look at there, I'm not doing this just because it happens to be here, the color of lips. I just think it would be quite nice there. And the more I look, when you have a color on your brush, I can start to see kind of these pinks all over the place. So one suggestion is that if you have a color on your brush, think economically, where else can you put that color? Don't just leave that color just on that area that you may have observed it. Look across the whole picture, and where else can you see that color? No, actually, I think a better phrase is, where do you feel that that color would work very well? Because feeling is such an important phrase when we talk about painting. You need to be able to sort of feel the painting. I think it was John Constable, a famous British landscape painter, said that all painting is feeling. And when he's dead, I think he's dead right, that we need to paint more with just our eyes. We need to sort of have that gut instinct of what we sense is going on. So I just splash these little traces of pink, and they're very subtle. You know, they're not giant leaps. These are not in the face hot firing pink. They're just, you know, if you like, they are a sort of a peachy orange. I'm just going to squirt a nice big blob of crimson. Let's go a little bit lighter. Let's just add a bit more white now and see what happens. Oh, it's getting quite pinky there, isn't it? It's quite interesting. Got interesting effects going on. So I'm starting to utilize this in my very kind of light areas. And again, I'm thinking still in terms of tone, not in color, but just in terms of tonal value. So where do I see these pinky, lightest tones in the face? So I can see sort of in the nose there, looking at little pockets or shapes of color around the nose. And when I lay down my brush strokes, if they happen to be placed on top of or alongside pre-existing brush strokes, I'm allowing the brush strokes to kind of merge in with one another just a little bit, just so they come together, that they're working in unison, they're supporting each other out. So they're not jarring with each other, but they just slightly melt and marry in, and it sort of gives the picture sort of a togetherness. And for someone who, you know, like me, I love kind of really like brushy paintings. I like paintings where you can see the brush strokes and the brush work and what the artist has been doing and thinking with the brush. You know, for me, that's a really exciting and important quality to painting, and something that I always look to in other artists' work, both past and present, that I get very excited about, is the way they played and manipulated the paint with these sticks with hair on the end, in the most sort of economic and simplistic way possible, yet still saying everything that needs to be said. I think that's a bit of clever magic on the part of the artist. So sort of pushing in there. So again, you notice I'm kind of leaving kind of a couple of patches for the very extreme cools. So I've got a really interesting balance of orangey reds, or reddy oranges, yellowy oranges, you know, slightly paler pinks, slightly hotter pinks. You know, I could go even stronger with lots and lots of yummy alizarin crimson. This is like a hot candy floss pink now. And if I put it in, it may not come up, it may not be very visible because of the bright red and the orange slightly dominating it. But if I put it on quite thickly, it should pop up in quite a few spots. Now, if you really, really are a colorist and you have at your disposal the ability to utilize other colors, like, you know, quinacridone pink or hot pinks, these are pre-mixed colors out the tube that are super strong, then this is this would be up your street, where you don't have to necessarily mix. You could just go for those hot squirts of colors that you very rarely utilize in realistic representational painting, that you can reach out for those, being aware, of course, of its tone, how light or dark it is on a relative scale to all the other colors. And once you've identified its relative tone, then you can have some fun with it. And it doesn't matter where you put it. You can put it all over the place. Now, if you struggle seeing tonal values and squinting your eyes is not enough, if you just think that is not a helpful suggestion, then one thing that you could potentially do is, if you have the technical ability, is you could do a little playing and editing. So I've put this is on an iPad, and I think you could just do this automatically. Yes, that you could set it to black and white. If you look at an image and think of it in terms of black and white, it still works. I can still paint everything that I'm seeing in black and white. Instead of just looking at black and white, I'm just thinking of these tones, and I'm just going to spend 5 minutes looking at it like this. And it's amazing. Suddenly I'm noticing like tonal shifts. So for here on the forehead, this sort of darker shadow here on just above his left brow is perhaps a little stronger than I've painted it. So I can go in now and push in my darks just to get an idea of where those should be. And actually, yeah, the bridge across his nose, you see there's a lovely channel of darker tone there, and that would be quite useful to paint and quite hard to see. So just by flipping it to black and white, I can now put that in and suggest that. And as a result, the theory is that if you paint like this tonally, you will create a picture that therefore is more three-dimensional, because that's what tonal values give us. They give us 3 dimension, they give us form, they give us shape. So the common kind of thing I always say, that if you've got a painting of your own that looks flat and dull, just has no sense of shape or depth, then the problem is a tonal one. So the answer is, well, make your darks a bit darker or your lights a bit lighter. That's usually what the need to be, is to sort of strengthen your highlight shadows or a combination of the both. So I can just strengthen. Look at this, see where it comes down on his cheek. You see, it just gets a bit darker, where I could have maybe pushed it a bit darker. So I can just make that point in his cheek. And I'm using kind of back to my warm reds and crimsons again, just to help me get that. And possibly slightly darker there. One thing you could do as well is, if you photograph your painting whilst it is in progress, photograph your painting, and if you have that editing capability, press the button and see what your painting looks like when it's black and white, and compare your black and white painting to the black and white reference image that you happen to be working with. This, of course, is biased to working from photography. If you're working from a live model, it's slightly harder to ask your model to turn into a black and white model, but it does rely on that kind of little camera trickery. But it is quite a useful piece of tech. And at the click of a button can direct us and lead us exactly to where we should be thinking in tone. So bizarrely, the first part of my demonstration is actually, I'm thinking in terms very much of tones, not thinking in terms of color. So I'm going to last few minutes just to finish sort of blocking this in, and I'm going to push in, that's not light enough. I'm going to push it sort of more there. I'm going to go much bluer in that area, much cooler up in that area, so I'm going to do too much more. So I'm going a lot lighter, and as I work lighter, that famous characteristic with particularly oil paint is we get thicker with the paint, so the paint really does stick on, so it doesn't sort of fall off. So going a bit kind of lighter in places there. Just took a little step back. I always try and paint standing up, particularly when I paint portraits, bigger scale pictures like this. If I'm painting smaller scenes, I'll sit down. Well, it depends really, but for when I paint big things like this, I always feel like I need to stand up so I can rock back on my heel. I'm only taking a step or two back, just to sort of take it all in, because it's quite easy to get overwhelmed, and you can't quite see for looking really when one is working up so close to it. So by standing back, taking it all in, I can assess how things are working and how things are looking, and whether they are working successfully or not. Just a little bit more pushing on the mid-tones. Variety of colour is important, in that I have a variety of oranges in this. So if you are painting this portrait and it's oranges, or if you were doing this and it was in greens, don't just work with one green. Try and make all the different varieties of that colour that you possibly can make. So you see, I've got so many different varieties of warm oranges and pinks. There's such a wide analogous colour palette. Don't be stingy and just stick to kind of one. So the palette is really useful. Can you see how all the colours are informing each other? They're all mixed into each other. Because I'm only using analogous colours, i.e. colours that are near each other on the colour wheel, basically warm colours, it's very difficult to get muddy colours when they're all working together. Mud only happens when you start bringing in the cool colours, okay? A little bit of blue's fine, because just a tiny bit, it's a good darkening agent, and particularly ultramarine blue is quite warm anyway, because there's a lot of crimson in that one. The danger of the situation of making muddy colours occurs when you start bringing in warm and cool colours, and they start kind of crashing and clashing with each other. But I'll show you how we control those in the next part of the demonstration. So I think that's a good little point to take our short little interval break. Before I disappear for a few minutes, I'm going to just give you a close-up just to see how this looks up before I disappear, so I can give you a close-up. So this is sort of the distance and perspective that I'm painting. You're all sat on this easel over my left shoulder. So I'm sort of painting it from this sort of distance, which is about a step away. But if I go closely, you can see how kind of what we call very blocked in. It's very crude at this stage, but very delicious and painterly. Very yum. You can see all those lovely brush strokes. And you can see the thickness, you know, of this brush stroke, which is my light, which is the thickest. Compare the thickness of that to, say, the crimson, which is a lot thinner. You can see it hasn't got as much body, and compare that to the underpainting, which is this bit here. You can see some underpainting there. Here's a good journey. So you've kind of got the thicker brush strokes of the white and the yellow, compared to the crimson, compared to the red, compared to this orange, which if I rub my finger, I mean, it's literally, it's almost impossible to get anything off. It's stained more than anything. So that journey of thin to thick, it's the hardest thing to get across on Zoom, because this is not one for getting in texture, but it just to give you that indication of the journey of how brushstrokes are working in and how kind of blocked it appears at this stage. But the magic should happen when you stand back. So up close, it's all very individual. You can see the brushstrokes. Now watch what happens when I come back. All those brushstrokes had worked together, and you no longer notice them, and you should start to get that illusion of something that is pushing three-dimensional. And when we come back in part 2, I'll show you what happens when we start bringing in the other colours, and that's when the fireworks start to happen, and we start to create something that's rather interesting. Hello, hello, hello. Right, I can see there's a question come through. It's from David. Hello, David. David's asked, you obviously don't advocate mixing principal colours before you start. Is this the best way to get more colour in a portrait? I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best way of getting more colour into a portrait, although I feel that when one pre-plans and pre-mixes that range of colours on a palette, it can sometimes be quite restrictive, because one feels very beholden to those mixes that you've done, and you're less likely to make kind of impulsive choices and directions in pull, whether it's in pull of tone or in pull of colour temperature. I also find that when you sit down and plan all those colours, it does require a certain amount of awareness from the very outset of what colours you're going to choose and use. And sometimes I don't quite know where a picture's going to go. I think it's part of the enjoyment of any painting is the discovery as it happens. I have a vague idea of where it may go. I have an idea of where I want it to go, but part of it is enjoying discovering. And for me, planning all the colors out to begin with requires me to be very, very aware at the beginning of what I wish to achieve, and takes away kind of my creative freedom. I do know that those artists that work a lot more representationally, i.e. making their colours accurate to the model or the subject, do sometimes mix those out because they find that very useful for kind of getting the skin pigment. And a good tip is that if you are painting from life, is mix what we call the kind of the natural skin color, the pigment. So your foundation color, try and identify the model's foundation color, mix a nice dollop of that in your palette, and then you'll know that you have varying degrees of lightness or darkness of that foundation color. But because I'm not worried about color accuracy on this, pre-mixing wouldn't be helpful to me at all. Another thing to be aware of is that when you pre-mix colors, that in itself can take ages. It can take a long time, an hour or more sometimes, of actually really mixing with a palette knife to get a good dollop of that. And on those occasions in the past where I did try it, I realized that actually I was wasting more paint. I'd spend ages trying to mix a good dollop of the color, and I only needed a little bit of it, and then the rest of it was actually just wasted. I didn't need it at all. So whereas I am mixing with the brush, also when I mix the brush, it just has a closeness of color. And sometimes when you're working very formulaic with the pre-mixed blobs, it doesn't have that kind of unity that for me I enjoy in painting in my own work and looking at the others. So isn't necessarily a useful thing. James, hi James, good to see you. Right week. Did you use a white ground before the drawing stage? Yes. So this is a white ground. This is pure white. I do sometimes work on a coloured ground. It doesn't really have much of an impact. Again, because this is a sketch and this is a teaching exercise, so just work straight onto the white. But I could have painted this colour. If I were going to paint this a colour, a base ground, I would lean towards choice that is the opposite colour temperature of, in this case, the face. So if the picture is predominantly made up of very warm warm brushstrokes and warm depiction, then choosing a cool underpainting is a really kind of nice synergy, because when you put the warm brushstrokes on top of the cooler background, you kind of have that nice edginess. However, a contradictory point is actually to choose a base colour that you see a lot of. So I could have painted this bright orange, then painted orange on top. But because I want to create a picture that's got a bit more energy with a diversity of colour, choosing a contrast of colour temperatures, or what we call complementary colours. Complementary colours are, of course, of colours that are found opposite the colour wheel. That's quite a good thing if you want to really show off the showcasing of colour. If you want a picture that has more harmony, more closeness, more atmosphere, then choosing colours that are much more closer together would help that. So if I put a bright yellow base under this, for example, that would really kind of have a kind of a warmth and a closeness to it. Whereas if I put bright turquoise, green or blue, you've got that instant dynamic kind of edginess. Let's take you a bit closer now. Take my glasses off. I don't paint with my glasses on. I only put them on to see what's going on on the screen. So I'll take my glasses off. I utilise my blurry vision for effect. So I have a sense of a head, and I want to start balancing now and playing with the variety of colour. And I'll just make sure that is muted. There we go. So I'm now going to start looking at my cooler colours and see what they can offer me. Just going to move this pink away. A good little tip for palette management, i.e. not creating colours that end up turning muddy, is try and have a part of your palette that is reserved for the warmer colours and another part of your palette that is reserved for your cooler colours, and try and kind of keep them separated. So I'm just sort of rubbing away that pinky area, because if I start getting green in that pinky area, we know what's going to happen. We're going to mix green and pink together, and green and pink essentially will make a brown muddy colour. And I don't want that. I don't want browns, muds or greys, so I'm just keeping those slightly separated. So I've kind of got I cleaned that up, just rubbed it, so I've got my warmer colours at the top and the cooler colours at the bottom. So where do we start? Let's start carefully, okay? I'm not going to throw bright blue or green. I'm going to build myself up, okay? Little steps, much kinder, much nicer. The other thing I'm going to do is to make my life easier, I'm going to use different brushes. So I've got these two brushes that I use to paint all of this. On what's that, number 6 and number 8, which did most of that work. And I'm going to work with a different pair of brushes, okay? Another set, it's another, what's slightly smaller, a 6 and a 4, but they're clean and they're brand new brushes, because these are going to have my cooler brush strokes or my cooler colors. Because again, if you kind of combine your warms and your cools, you're much more likely to get multicolors. So I'm going to have a pair of warm brushes and a pair of cool brushes. So if you have the luxury to do that, and get some more brushes. The more brushes you have, the easier it can be often, and keeping colors kind of clean and concise. The second color, the new cool color I'm going to bring in is going to be a color that's sort of on the edge, and that's a purple. Now I've already sort of got these sort of very hot burgundy colors, but they're not purpley enough. I think they need to be bluer. So I'm going to start off with crimson as my base, and crimson of course is very close, and I'm going to bring a bit of ultramarine blue, and we know if I do that I'm just going to get that dark color. But the magic happens of course when I bring a bit of white, and when I bring white in, suddenly we start getting these lovely lavender colors. So it's not an extreme change, it's a slightly cooler version of what's already gone on. And this is a good point, that if you have a pre-mixed purple color, like a violet, a cobalt violet, or an amethyst, or there's lots of amazing, beautiful colors out there, it's a good time that you could, if you want to, utilize those instead of mixing. And sometimes a pre-mixed purple is better than a purple that you can mix from these two colors, because sometimes when you mix two colors, it can look a little bit grainy, a bit grayer compared to an out the tube color. So I'm now looking at the picture and I'm trying to think, well, where do I see, where do I feel that there could be some cooler purples in there? So I'm thinking in terms of temperature, and I think, well, there seems to be, if I just look at the region of the eyes, around the eyes, I just feel there's sort of cooler traces, cooler little notes, we call them, of color in certain places. So I'm just putting what we call these just little notes, just little marks, just to sort of see how that feels, how that looks. I'm not sort of drastically plastering it over everywhere, just putting these little suggestions, these little hits of color, just for me to see how it's working. So it's not drastic. These little purples, they're not screaming out to you like they don't belong, because they're quite warm. They're quite a warm purple. So it's still playing it safe. So if you're going to be trying this independently with your own kind of color palette, just take those little small steps. Don't be tempted to throw every color at the kitchen sink at it straight away. Just take your time. So I'm thinking in terms of this cooler color, of its relative tone as well. So, I'm looking at the side of his head here, and I think it's just got a nice sort of cool purple note. So I've just put a bit of white in it. Now, if you find it difficult to see these colors, it's a funny thing with this, because I can't tell you. I can say where I can see these colors, but the way that we see color is a very individual thing, because I can't tell you the way I see the world. All I can tell you is how I see it, not the way I see it. And if I see a color part on the face that just to me looks like that color, it does, just because it does. Am I seeing it the exaggerated way I'm painting it? Of course I'm not. Of course I'm not. I'm exaggerating it. I can, I'm just looking at that bit on his beard, and I think, well, it could be a bit mauvey-ish, sort of. Well, instead of it being a bit mauvey-ish, well, let's just push that up a little bit higher. I'm kind of pushing the saturation of it. So these little notes are just really quite useful and helpful for me to sort of gauge how it's working. And already, have you noticed the skin just looks so much more interesting? It's just got so much more character to it, because I've got that little synergy, that little balance of cooler color. It's amazing what an additional color temperature balance can do. It's another good tip of if you've got a painting of yours that's just looking a bit dull. And tone will help it look and nudge it towards 3-dimension, but a use of color balance and color temperature will just give it a bit more excitement. So if you've got a painting that you're looking at and it's just for you is a bit bland and a bit uninteresting, Well, think about the colours that you've got on there and see if you can think of putting other colours in that's just going to sort of liven it up. And those colours are often the kind of the complementary colours, the opposite colours that make up the most of your picture. So a good classic example is if you've got a landscape that's very green. Let's say you've got a very greeny landscape, and it's just looking a bit, well, just a bit green and a bit obvious and a bit uninteresting. Well, a good way to do it is to see if you can find opportunities to introduce some reds and oranges, some warm colours, complementary colours to those greens. And you, by golly, when you put those in, suddenly the picture will just look so much more interesting. You don't need a lot. It's just a little suggestions, little notes like I do now, little hits in places. I am putting them on quite strongly because, partly because of time. I haven't got time to sort of spend ages on this. So you can soften them in, you can blend them in, you can do light little scumble brush strokes. But you'll be amazed at how much more interest your picture will get just by a little suggestion of opposite colours. And everyone did it. You look at a Turner painting, look at a Constable painting as far back as then. Baroque artists like Rubens, artists were utilising that to then, of course, the masters at it, of course, were the Impressionists, absolute masters of utilising colour. So I've pushed up my blues are just getting a little lighter now. They're sort of purple is sort of getting more indigo-y now. So a lot more ultramarine blue, just a hint of crimson, but a much more ultramarine blue, a little bit of white in just to kind of keep it on the lighter side. And again, just identifying parts of it where I just feel a little hint of it will be acceptable. Now, as I'm laying these marks, this is a painterly observation and a bit of advice, is that when I'm laying these marks down, I'm very careful that I don't rub them into the existing paint. Okay, so what you've probably noticed, throughout the entire painting thus far, is that I'm laying my brush strokes on quite structurally, quite solid, quite considerate, quite decisive. They're not sort of thin and namby-pamby and unsure themselves. I put a brush stroke on and I leave it. I very kind of rarely fuss and fiddle the marks. I kind of lay them on and sort of leave them. That is especially important when you start introducing your cooler colours on top of or around your warmer colours in this case. And the same would be the opposite. If you did this the other way around, if you started off with your cooler colours and then put the warmers on, this is not the only way to paint this style. You could do it in a completely other direction. Then when you lay on your marks, so as I put my cooler brush strokes on, please try and keep those brush strokes unfussed and unblended. Put it on and leave it. Try and put the brush stroke on, just under the eyebrow there and above there, and try and leave it. You can soften the edge of it, that brush stroke. So just this brush stroke around his eyebrow. I might just want to just take, I've just wiped this brush clean. You can just take the excess paint off. I do this, here, I just wipe off the excess paint. So it's not clean, but it's not covered in paint. And I might just gently merge or blend that brush stroke in. I can still see the blue, it's just not quite as oomphy. It's just melted in. So you can do that, that's fine. But for goodness sake, don't do that. Don't go brush, 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 blend, 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 up, down, because that's when you can really take away a lot of the loveliness of the brush strokes, number one. But more importantly, number two, is where you'll get muddy colours. So one of the kind of the secrets, if you like, of creating a picture that has more colour into it is don't overwork it. Okay, try not to kill the life and the energy that it has. And it's amazing just what these purples have done. Can you see how much more interesting, how much richer the portrait looks already, just with these little accents of purpley mauves? Let's push it one step higher now. Let's push it with some brighter blue, because I mean, this blue of his top is fabulous. So let's see what happens when I could do that. So I'm going to bring in ultramarine blue and my lighter blue. This is what we call this is a King's Blue Deep, Michael Harding's King's Blue Deep. It's very, very similar to cobalt with a bit of white. Natural cobalt is very expensive as a pigment, I do have some, but I only keep it for special occasions. Let's just put a hit, a little spot there. Oh, isn't that nice? That just yummy, yummy, yummy colour. The reason it's yummy is because it's a complementary and it complements the oranges. Suddenly the warms and the oranges look so much more warmer because it's got that note, it's got that hit of blue. I should put something on the left-hand side. I'm loath to because I quite like how this blank is, but I'm just going to put just a little note of it there. Oh, isn't that magic? This is the best bit of painting this. So I'm not just going to leave the blue just for the clothing. That would be boring. That's obvious. He's got a blue top, so I'm not going to paint it all blue because I quite like the sketchiness. Maybe just a hint more. But I'm going to try and observe where else can I put some blue in this painting that's going to make it interesting. Let's just bring a hint just down there. So where else can I put this blue in here? And of course, I've got to bring it into the face, haven't I? It's got to have it. Now, this is where I'm going to take you closer. Okay, it's really important. I want to see how I do this. So you're not going to see the photograph now, but what you'll hopefully see is more of the action of the brush stroke. So I want you to see what's going on and how I lay these colours down. My brushes. Okay, so you could just about see, yes, you can see the palette, that's fine. So let's start off with this relatively deep blue. Can I see any strong deep blues in my photograph? Not really, but I can feel that parts of his skin where the light is coolest is here on the left-hand side. Now that's really important that straight away I identified the direction of light. I knew it was sort of light was very much traveling on the left-hand side. I'm going to just make his hair just a bit darker using my dark bluey purple color. That's the ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, just a bit of a darker note. But I observed that the light that's traveling on across the face on the left-hand side is a very cool light. And you can see that on his skin, on his cheek on the left here, it's a very white light. It's not warm like a lamp light. It's very white and pale, almost like a daylight bulb. And daylight creates these lovely cool qualities. At the moment, I'm using lots of white and a little bit of this pale blue. So I'm making a very, very light sky blue sort of colour. And I'm biasing these marks on the left-hand side of the face, where that light, coolness of light is hitting his face. And you see what's starting to happen. You get these really interesting characteristics. Again, I'm laying it down, being very careful not to rub it in. If anything, when the brush rubs in, if I was to rub it in, it's just going to mix in with the yellow. And of course, what's going to happen? I'm going to get a nice greeny colour. So it's not always bad to manipulate the colours in, just being very careful. Take more of that whole bottom lip actually is slightly bluer under there. Why not? Maybe a little bit of blue under here. So this light blue is essentially my kind of substitute light tone, because the pale blue is very light. It's got a lot of white in it. But I can also see it on the right-hand side of his face as well. So I'm using that pale blue. And you could use any pale colour, really. But it's the coolness that I'm after. You see how it's naturally mixed in there. It's sort of gone a little bit yucky. So my brush has just picked up a little bit of paint from a neighbouring colour. So I'm just going to go back into it, wipe my brush and put it on as I'd like to. Compositionally, I can see that I'm going to bring that ear in a little bit. It's sort of jumping a bit too far out. So I'm just going to, again, draw. Again, I'm still drawing. All painting is drawing. So, you know, I'm always correcting, clarifying, changing, restating. Where I need to. Keeping it quite light suggested in places. Let's go a bit more purpley. Just down in the cheek there, just restating some of my darks. I'm going to change that ear in a moment. A bit more dark on his beard. Bringing in some of that dark ultramarine blue now. So tonally, very, very dark, as you can see. But also it's now giving a nice cool accent. I'm just going to soften this because, of course, I kind of want to get the texture of the beard. So allowing it to melt and blend in is going to help that quality. I've kind of got 3 or 4 brushes in my hand now, juggling, going from warm to cool, warm to cool. It's a bit more red on that left-hand side there, a bit more red coming down here, down there. I feel that I need to give some sort of information for those eyes. I need to kind of cool the eyes. Now the eyes, the white of the eye, they look quite yellowy to me. They have a kind of a cool, pale yellowiness. So that's how I'm going to do them. Very white, but a sort of a buttery yellow. So that's using my lighter yellow and white. So I'm just sort of put those in. But parts of the white of the eyes also look quite cool as well. They look a bit odd. If you keep them the same temperature, they'll look a bit odd. So I'm going to start off with this tone. So tone quite light, temperature quite warm with the yellow. So there's those. Yeah, looks funny now. And then with my cooler blue, I've swapped brushes to my cooler blue, and I can just now add a bit of cooler blue in places. That diversity of temperature makes it look a bit more interesting. So I can see it looks slightly bluer to me just on that right-hand side. And now I'm going to strengthen the kind of the pupils and the iris. So again, totally very dark. So I'm going to my crimson and blue just to give myself a dark. I'm going to make it redder, actually, just a bit more cad red. That's nice. I don't want it to be too black. And roughly get the shape. Keeping the edges of the irises soft into the white. It's tempted to paint them very crisp, but don't paint them softly. Allow them to kind of melt in with the whites of the eye. They'll look a lot more convincing and realistic if you do. And then I can go a stage darker to just give that indication of where the pupil will be. And then there's that suggestion of the reflection in the eye, which I'm going to do as a nice pale blue. You see that lovely light in the eye, which is about there. I'm going to look at some characteristics just to strengthen the dark just under the eye. It's a bit too dark, so go warmer. And strengthen the shape going up there. Again, I just want to, I'm not over stressing on the accuracy of things because I'd spend forever on it. Well, I wouldn't spend forever on it because I can barely stand working on a painting for more than a day, but just want to focus on the colours more than anything else, of course. I feel that kind of gives the a funny characteristic to those eyes. And again, these were done with the number 4, so I could get a level of precision. I've got about half an hour, I suppose, so I might be able to do a little bit more if it's needed. But I'll know if it's needed towards the end as I'm kind of bringing it all together. There's more to do. Yes, there is more to do. Lots more to do. Ooh, push that eyebrow back up a bit. So I'm really pleased. And again, I just took a good step back just to sort of see how this connects. Now, because there's one sort of colour that I've yet to really introduce, and that's my level of greens. Now, of course, there's a lot of green that started, not I say a lot, there's hints of green turquoise that have started to pick up, and that's naturally where the blue is mixed in with the yellow. But if I start bringing in some aqua, so this is Viridian, it's quite a soft Viridian, this one. It's not, some Viridians can be quite strong, but this is quite a soft one. Any green would be fine, whether it's, you know, a bottle green or a phthalo green. Careful with the phthalos, they're great, but they're super strong. And I'm just finding places where I think this would feel quite nicely. And again, I can see perhaps green tinges maybe in the coolness of the beard. I can see cool traces sort of up here on the head on the top right-hand side. Maybe if I put a bit of yellow into it, that's going to really make it a nicer green. Oh, that's a much nicer green up there. Now, if you're a bit of a colorist and would like to look at paintings by artists that have really pushed color to their really fullest potential, you know, then I'd look at a set of artists called the Fauve artists, which was an art movement, sort of a post-impressionist art movement, really, in the late 1800s, but very much early 1900s, and was famously led by Matisse, Henri Matisse, but also Derain, Kandinsky for a while was very much considered a Fauvist before he went into his into abstract work. Raoul Duffy, Kunsten, there's quite a group of them, and the way they really play with colour is extraordinary. How they can paint really quite beautiful scenes in quite garish colours, but it all sort of seems to work and come together. So look at the Fauve artist, which I think is they're known as the beasts, the wild beasts. Kind of their disregard for reality was the name that they were given. Get some more information around that nose. I can see a lot more green. Can you see this light here on his cheek? I mean, to me, you can't see it, can you? Just realised. I mean, to me, that just looks here on his cheek there. I mean, this just reads. So there's his face there. So on the right-hand side of his cheek there, on the jaw, and that, to my eye, that just reads as being very kind of greeny. It has a greenish tinge to it, quite a yellowy green. Again, it's just how I feel it. So I'm just going to just drag that in very gently. And the green colour is the colour I'm most careful with, because the green's the colour that is very complementary to the warm. It's basically the complete opposite colour to everything else that I've got. You know, the majority of this picture, the body, the structure of this painting is very much my red oranges, and green is pretty much the opposite end of the spectrum to that. So I'm very careful when I put those on that I've saved them kind of almost to the end, and I'm very careful with how I manipulate them on the painting. Just bringing a little bit more strength down here. I really am juggling between 4 brushes here. I've got 4 brushes, so pay to kind of know what brush you're pushing around at the time, for fear of making the wrong mark. Now I want to look at, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? I want to go slightly lighter in a couple of places in tone. So I'm going to rely a little bit more heavily on my whites now. And before I do, I'll quickly photograph it at this stage. Let's put that up there. Again, wipe to brush clean. And then let's put a bit of white. What do I want to do? I want to strengthen the light on the right-hand side of the face. And that's quite important here, there. So I'm just blocking that on. And because I'm working my lightest tone, there is a bit of blue in it. It's not pure white. I'm staining it. So just knock a colour back. Never work with pure white. Well, avoid working with pure white if you can. Always try and stain it to influence it with a colour temperature. Pure white straight out the tube can often make a picture just again look a bit flat, a bit dull, a bit obvious. So try and give it a note, a pastel kind of leaning towards a specific colour. So these are very, very pale whites, but they're stained blue. They've just got a slight tinge of blue on it. just help it work and read into the existing painting. Just go slightly more purpley. Actually, I want to go slightly more red actually in that area. Where's my red brush? There's my red brush. Just want to strengthen the red up in that area there. When I get to this point of the painting, it's pure balancing act now. It's like seasoning your dinner, you know, a bit more salt, a bit more pepper, a bit more sweet and sour, vinegar, just to kind of all balance it, the right flavors of your dinner. It's a little bit like that, but in a painting term, just need to balance up the main components of the painting. And I'm thinking back to those three areas, thinking in terms of light and dark, tone, warm and cool, temperature. And then lastly are things in the right place? Do I need to, I can see that this part of the head is a bit swelling. In theory, it should be a bit more over there to get more accurate proportions. So I'm thinking very much in those sort of three areas. Tone always comes first, lightness and darkness. So do I need to make parts of the picture lighter or darker? Number one. If I identify a space, oh yes, that needs to be lighter or darker. I ask myself the supporting question, does the color that you're about to put down, that needs to be lighter or darker, does that color need to be a warm color or a cool color? So tone comes first, then quickly followed by the question, its temperature, the temperature of that color. And I'm working in quite exaggerated terms today. But if I was working in a realistic color palette, i.e., colors that look like the thing that I want it to look like, I would do it, but it would just be very subtle. So, there's a great difference between, the skin color on the back of my hand. Those brushes down. So if I'm looking, the temperature that's happening here on my knuckles is warmer compared to the temperature here, which is sort of cooler. It's got more kind of a greenish color, whereas that's slightly more pinker, more orangey. So even with the skin tone, that is warmer, that is cooler. So when I'm mixing colors, thinking about it in terms of temperature, but then quickly followed by, tone first, then quickly followed by temperature is the real key to creating paintings that just have a much greater sense of interest and ultimately reality. If they're all painted the same flat color, it will just look like that. It will look just flat. I'm going to try and tidy up this ear a little bit. And if I put some yellowy orange in the background, I'm not quite sure if that's going to do anything, but I might try and put a little bit of there. And I'm using what we call cutting in. So I'm just cutting that in with a bit of orange. I could use a blue, but I kind of like the limitedness of the blue in just the clothing. So I'm just going to keep it quite pale with my orangey yellow there. So I'm just sort of shading that around his head. And again, I've run out of yellow. So this will be the third squirt of yellow. Because just to show how much I've used it, not just in terms of a colour, but in terms of a lightening agent to lighten up my existing colours. I'm going to just quickly wash that brush, because then when I put it on, it should go on a bit, and there I can get that nice yellowiness, the transparency of it. Let me just put a little bit to balance it on the right-hand side. And again, somebody will have something really quite exciting when that yellow goes right next to that blue. Oh, yummy. That's what we like. So it's finding relationships is so much fun when thinking in terms of colour like this. What colours can I put down just that really have a heck of a zing? It's sort of, I kind of see that it's like fireworks. I think in terms of fireworks at this stage, just looking for spectacle effects. And just having fun. This is where my mother says, you just colour in for a living, Peter. You're not really an artist, just playing. Just doing what you did when you were younger, just colouring in all the time. She's not wrong, really. Art is serious play. As Grayson Perry says, art is serious play. It's serious for us to play in this way. We're the lucky ones that we can play like this. So don't lose sight of that. Don't take yourself too seriously in the painting. You know, hopefully you want the joy to really come through in a picture, especially like this. You know, if this picture can't feel fun and silly and joyous, then what picture can? I've left some gaps in the face there. I just want to kind of quickly follow up. So I'm just using that kind of pale, no, that's horrible colour. It's got kind of pale bluish colour. That's a bit nicer. I think I could even go a little bit lighter on this cheek, like that there. And even paler still, the way it kind of curves across his nose. And of course, when I'm going lighter, I'm allowing the paint to sit on the surface thicker, so it really stays, resisting every temptation to blend and manipulate the brushstrokes. It's a difficult urge to resist, not to scratch it, but hopefully the picture looks better as a result for it. A little bit lighter in the eyes. Of course, when I get lighter, I get thicker, and by getting thicker, one offers just a bit more of an interesting textural dynamic to the picture. This has got nothing to do with color. This is more my, you know, favored approach, style, if you like. But the lighter brush strokes, the thicker, you know, balance out the slightly thinner brush strokes, which are the darker brush strokes. The darker brush strokes have not got as much body. There's less pigment and body on the paint, whereas the lighter brush strokes, of course, are much fatter, got a lot more body on the paint. It's the brush strokes, so there's more paint on there. So you've just got that nice balance of thick and thin, good balance between warm and cool, a good balance between light and dark. That's the secret, just having a good balance of everything. Might put just a few more cheeky greens in places. The third point I keep in mind whilst I'm painting, that's a good question. So it's tone, temperature, but then also composition. You know, are things in the right place? And in some things that's crucial, i.e. a portrait that needs to look like the person, because that's not always true. It doesn't always have to look like a person. It could feel like sometimes it's better to feel like a person as opposed to looking like a person. But yeah, sort of, for example, you know, is the eye in the right place? Does the leg need to be moved? Do I need to move the eye, and so on? So that's the sort of the other part that I would think of. But then every time one makes a mark, every time I lay a mark down, I ask myself, am I using the right color? Sorry, let me try that again. Every time I lay a mark down, I ask myself, is it the right tone? And is it the right temperature? So I'm just putting on a few cool greens. I'm not overly satisfied with the area here. It's got a little bit mucky and a bit muddy. So I'll show you what I do if that happens. If I get an area of the painting that just does look a little bit on the muddy side, I'll take my trusty palette knife. I've got a weird, funny little palette knife here, but any palette knife will do, whether it's a pointy one, a round one, it doesn't really matter what you have. I've got this one because it's clean. And I'm just going to scrape that off. Just scrape that kind of heaviness. It's all got a bit muddy there. I think it looks better already just taking that off. So I'm going to scrape off that mud and I'm going to try again. Let's try and put that on as it should be, where it's less kind of congested with all that. So it was back to my kind of pale bluey colours. And as I lay it on now, it should just look a bit cleaner. You know, it's a lot stronger, isn't it? So it shouldn't be quite as mucky as it was mixing with the red. So I'm just going to blend it in with a bit of the cool green there. So I think that's sort of better already. So if you do get an area that's a bit contaminated, a bit muddy, a bit mucky, that's fine. Just get your knife lifted up. That's the joy of oil. It allows you to do that. And of course, if you are an acrylic artist, then you just wait 5 minutes and come back, and then it's dry, and then you can just paint over it. So you kind of have that luxury as well. I'm just going to put a final couple of marks. And I'm going to have to step away from it and take a real break for fear of messing it up and overworking it. Just want to make just a couple of darker marks up in the hair. Like that. Even tickle in some cheeky bits of blue. I think some blue in the hair would look nice. Give them a bit of a blue rinse. It just makes a very boring area a bit more interesting just by splashing a bit of colour into it. But it's colour that's dark in tone, so it doesn't jump out. I love the blue in his clothing. I want to get more of it in the body for a balancing reason. This is delicious. I love this blue. I just think, wouldn't it be nice if there was more up in the face? Just a hint more. So I'm just going to pull you away now, just so you can see it all in context. So I'm thinking about balancing now. I'm not really, in many ways, looking at the image. I'm just looking at the painting and what can I do just to make it just that little bit more interesting. And I love my strong blues down here. I think these are great. So where else can I put some strong blues? And my instinct is saying sort of somewhere up here on the top left. So I'm just dragging them on. Just put a few suggested marks here, there. Maybe in the ear. Maybe around the eye, just a little bit. See, it just has that nice correspondence, balancing nicely. As I sort of said earlier, that it's all about creating that balance. And I think all good paintings that have ever been painted, I think if you kind of break it down in terms of the fundamentals, you'll notice that they'll be beautifully balanced. They'll have a bit of this and therefore a bit of that. So, you know, if you're going to go dark in places, make sure you show parts of the painting that are light. You've got a mixture of light and dark, yin and yang. If you're going to put painting with lots of cool parts to it, then balance it by a bit of warm. If you're going to have part of the painting with a bit of empty negative space, balance it with an area with a lot of detail. If you've got a part of the painting that's you know, lively with bitty brushwork, have another part of the painting that's soft with brushwork. Think of yin and yang. If you have part of the picture that's very thin with application of paint, then find an area of the painting where you could be thicker with paint, more stronger with your brush strokes. The more yin and yang, the more diversity you can give it, the more interest you will create. And therefore the viewer, the person looking at your picture, is going to look at it longer because they're going to be able to compare this to that. So even just that line I just put there, that thinner line, is a welcomed line because it's now contrasting the wider brushstrokes around it, and the thin lines around his eyes and the ear and the mouth. Those little linear marks are balancing and contrasting the bigger squiggles and the bigger, fatter planes. You just got that interesting yin and yang. If it was all the same brushstroke, it just looks samey. The eye gets bored very, very quickly. So the more you can give any painting a rich sense of diversity, the viewer will stay with it longer. And I suppose ultimately, isn't that what we all want? We want people to look at our pictures longer and longer. And again, that's not specific really to this color palette of painting. That's just all areas of painting, whether you're a realist or a colorist, an abstract artist, even a sculptor. So I think I'm pretty much now at the stage where I do much more, overwork it, and I think it's important to take a bit of a break. Am I going to feel about the eyes when just using partly because I just need a smaller brush. I'm just going to just look at just getting the edge of that eye a little bit more sound, using just a bit of green there just to highlight, because it looks a bit cooler than the white of that eye. White to the eye, never white, obviously, we know that. Never paint them white. They're always off-white. And just strengthen the dark in the middle of it with a bit of the deeper blue. But of course, they always say in a portrait, if you get the eyes right in a portrait, then you're always bound to make a successful portrait, because they'll be really looking at it. And just soften the edge of the left eye. And then I'll show you close up how it looks. So this is the only time I've got a small brush out. Amazing what you can get away with doing with good sized brushes. He's got a funny face. I love it. It's not until you stand back and take it in. Oh gosh. Bit of a stronger blue just in around the eye there. Oh, it's nice. So there you go. That's my very rapid, very colourful approach of getting just that little bit more colour into your picture. Just remember how this started. It started on a blank bit of paper. I've never painted this face before, by the way. I don't like painting the same faces. It's always nice to get to know a face in paint. But I started off with that very loose. You can even see some of this initial painting. I like painting. I love it when you can see how a painting's come together. I think it's quite fascinating. So you can see that there's some initial sketch marks, even just around the edge of the face of the very first bit of painting, and even my scribbliness there. Once I kind of got a very light scumbled impression of the face, is where we start building up, you know, the meatier tone. So I started very much with my warmer palette. It was a warm face. The face is warm, the clothing was cool. So it made sense, stick to a reduced numbers of yellow, reds and oranges and work from there, and really explore that and think not in terms of color, but think in terms of tonal value, how light and dark that relates. If it means switching the photograph to black and white, then so be it. Once we've kind of got that and we've got a sense of three dimension, your darks, your highlights, and then your mid-tones, which should give you shape and form, then you can start thinking about in terms of introducing some cooler notes, and those cooler notes will start to really kind of balance and play. So I am exaggerating. I feel these colors, I see these colors, but I'm really ratcheting them up. So if I feel that a part of the skin looks ever so slightly greenish, heck it, make it in very, very green and really kind of allow that to show. Sticking to some very traditional principles of painting, thin to thick, working from dark to light, and keeping those principles the same. Those rules have been around for centuries and they work well for this. So that will just stop me kind of fussing and over blending and being careful that those colors don't mix. So you can see on the palette, there's a clear, cool section, warm section. There's a slight bridge there, which is the purple, but they're very much staying kind of warm and cool. If you kind of keep that separated and stick to that principles of thin to thick and also dark to light, you're less likely of making those sort of poor kind of color muddy choices. And hey, this is a primary bias color palette. There's no browns, there's no blacks on it, just using pure delicious primary and secondary colors, and you can make every single color you possibly want. So even his hair looks black, even though I haven't got a black or a brown on that. So you don't really need that. And hey, if you are going to give this a go, and I'd really recommend that you do, is try that first with your basic primaries. But then once you've got a feel for it, then start bringing out those additional colors that you've got in your paint box, those lovely pre-mixed colors, because they really kind of do add a kind of really vivid yumminess to a picture that sometimes these, when you mix primary colors, that don't provide. Well, there you go. Thank you ever so much for joining me this evening. I hope you have enjoyed it. I'm going to stick around to answer any questions that you may have. If you're disappearing now because you're tucking yourself up to bed or starting your day wherever you are, then cheerio, good night, good afternoon, good morning. If you want to stick around and ask some questions, please do, and I'll give you a close-up. I did say I would, so I'm going to give you just a quick close-up so you can see how it looks. Close-up, so there he is. I need to give him a name. again, and we're not talking technique here. I know technically speaking, it's quite blocky, it's quite crude, but it's just the colors. Think of it just in terms of color. You'd never think that sort of weird pastel blue would work on the face. Those bright odd pinks. There's even bits of the bare canvas coming through there. I mean, here's just such an interesting relationship there. The blue into the yellow, into the orange. I mean, you can clearly see they're not kind of work together, but the magic happens is when you come back and you sort of don't notice it because your eye is bombarded by everything else. That synergy between the orangey yellow and that blue, really friendly. And look how the blue that I've spotted in places just echoes what's going on. So a good 3/4 of the painting is warm oranges and reds, but you've got the supporting characters of the cool blue. Look at the cool lights just happening here, just as it comes down. You come back and it all hopefully makes a bit of sense. There you go. Thank you very much. I've been seeing all the comments. You've all been too lovely, too delightful. Thank you ever so much. All right, everyone. Love to see you again. Thank you very much. Keep safe, keep busy, and above all, keep painting. And I'll see you again next time. Cheerio. Bye.